In this video, regarding the secure source code, what we're going to do is, in the previous videos, we have tried talking about what are the security controls for Azure Repos and GitHub. Seems the previous video recording was missing, but anyways, I have to go ahead as explained. So anyways, in this coming sessions, I'll go in depth about implementing each of these controls. Would we implement the authentication options in Azure DevOps? How would we integrate Azure Active Directory, Git credential managers? So everything we'll try to use one by one, which are mentioned in the security controls for securing the Azure repos. So GitHub is also the one at this point of time to make things easier and understandable. I'm trying to pick Azure repos, which will be much easier to implement because the same features to get it in GitHub as Bitcoin. Need to prefer some solutions which at this point of time I don't have. I'll prefer the Azure repos at this point of time. So let's control access control. So if you're talking about what is an access control, what we have in access control, the first comes is the authentication options, and in authentication options, we are trying to integrate with Azure DevOps and Git credential managers or PAT tokens. We can also authenticate options refer. This is it. So I'll create a project here. Create first a new organization. I'll keep that as dev.azure.com and projects. Okay, projects. I'll just keep it that way because we need to have a unique name. It's already taken, so I'll just say hyphen. This is an organization which I'm creating. So also open portal. A few things which I have to take care is, am I creating it in the same tenant? I have to actually validate it. Usually, if you're having only one account, portal account, and all that, these things won't be needed. But for my situation, it might be part of multiple tenants. So, few things which I have to ensure is, am I being the part of the right tenant or not? 0397. Okay. So I have to always create a unique across the Azure DevOps. The organization should be always unique. So I created a unique organization. Now let me create a project, and that is secure source code. At this point of time, I'll keep it private. And I have to go ahead and implement it. Now, first things which I have is Azure Active Directory integration. Now let's understand Azure Active Directory. Now, when you're trying to log into Azure DevOps, you're using the same credentials which we are accessing the Azure. So that's how you do it in your organization. Now, whoever is having access to the Azure DevOps and Azure Repos, because here, why are we focusing on Azure DevOps? Because Azure Repos as such comes under as a service under Azure DevOps tool. And Azure DevOps tool is when we provide access to the users to Azure DevOps, uh, they will be having access to the organizations, and under the organizations we have projects. So that's how it is divided into subsections in Azure DevOps. You don't need to know entirely about all these activities, but at least you have to have a walkthrough on it. So I went ahead when I logged in into dev.azure.com. I have to sign up, and once you sign up initially, if you are the first timer, and you should have access to portal.azure.com when you're trying out these things. It's pretty important. So you have to first go into portal.azure.com and you have to sign in and create an account, which is recommended. And once you're signed in and everything, then go ahead to dev.azure.com and create an organization. Under the organization, I created a project. Now, under the project is what we have Azure Repos. And I wanted, why am I integrating with Azure Active Directory? Reason why I wanted to integrate with Azure Active Directory is Azure Active Directory is an identity provider tool. All the organization will have users inside this Active Directory. So there will be lakhs of users or ten thousands of users and all that who will be given access to M365 or Office 365 tools or Azure portal or anything asset services wherever it is. Similarly, for DevOps people, whoever wants to have the access to repositories and all that, who should be given, they will be giving the access to Azure DevOps also. But how would Azure DevOps is a software as such, even it is Microsoft, how would it be aware of there is an Active Directory and there are so and so users and all that? So that is where you go and integrate this both, this Azure Active Directory and this Azure DevOps. To do that, I have to go inside the organization, I believe, and I have to click on the organization settings. When I click on the organization, there, if you see under the options in general category, I have a Azure Active Directory and it is by default got connected to my Active Directory because I'm in the same tenant, and that is where it was able to connect to this Active Directory. But if you wanted to connect to another Active Directory, you can go ahead and disconnect it and add it. Now, because I was able to connect to this, I can go and add users. At this point of time, this VRK test projects is only accessible to VRK for opportunities at gmail.com. But there is another user. If I look at the users, there is another user who's with vyakefakul at gmail.com. So let me try logging in with that account, dev.azure.com. Now I'll try to click on sign in. Provide the credentials. Once I logged in into it, it is asking me to provide the code. So the code should have been received to my email. What am I trying to test it here? Once I integrate with Active Directory, what is the use of it is what I wanted to show you guys. 468 215. There you go. I was able to log in. Now, the next thing which I have to do is, am I connected to that subscription or not? Just let me go and validate whether there is any resources here. No. Few things is, okay, I have to click on switch account. I don't need to have account to this. And I have to ensure that I am part of that. This is the tenant, I have to be part of it. So I'm selecting this. So here am I into this account. Now to go to the DevOps one. So DevOps, Azure DevOps organization, even you can try to search it here and you can click on this. So even from the portal.azure.com, you can go for Azure DevOps, or you can directly click dev.azure.com. So there are different areas and all that, app.vsps and all that. So no need to worry about all this. You can either click on dev.azure.com and sign in, or you can go from here. Search for Azure DevOps organizations and it will show you here. And let me go back to this. So which one? Select this. I'm part of this tenant. So part of the tenant. So first things which I have to ensure is, am I going to the tenant or not? So I see that there is no organizations as such here. I'll just create something. Let's XQESN. W. Okay. There are different ones, but I actually wanted to always prefer this one. D E A D. Okay. So there is VRK subscriptions. So here I was not having any organization. That is where it is coming in. So if you see, I don't have any access to any organization as such. Let me close that to make things easier. I'm selected that Active Directory wherever I'm part of this credential, and I am not able to. But as soon as I go back here, because if I go into this organization settings, as I integrated my Azure DevOps with the Azure Active Directory, I will be having access to add this user, this one, into this project. So if I search for VRK, cool, and okay, I'll do one thing is I'll just invite this guy, ADO user one, who's there. Let me see if I'm able to add him. ADO user one. There you go. So I just created this user here in this Active Directory, which I have it, and I'm able to right now in this organization, because it has been linked to this Active Directory. That's the reason why I'm able to add this users. I was able to look for ADO user. And why am I not able to get this the other user, which is VRK for cool? Probably because this is an external user. And might I have the settings specifically have to go and change user settings to allow guest users, external users. I have to ensure that there are a lot of things in terms of what have to be done and everything. At this point of time, not touching that. Uh, I'll leave that open and I'll go to this ADO user one and I'll add them. So before, let me go and I'll try to log in as an ADO user. So for that, I forgot the password here, but reset the password. So this is a password. Okay. Just let me log in. Temporary password is this. It's asking password. Just mention logged in. I can go to Azure DevOps organization. I can select this one. I wanted to select the my dev.azure.com organizations. If I look for ADO users, there is no. Okay. Because I didn't sign out from the previous account, the cookies is leading me to the other user. So here is ADO user, and I was able to only find one project organization under this one, but not the. I'm able no. This user was not able to see the this what do you say? This organization VRK-test projects. And if I have to see that one, they were able to see this one ADO July 2022 because that is when I created that user and he was given access for that one. But I wanted to give that person VRK test projects, and because my Azure Active Directory is being linked to this organization, I am able to search them from this Active Directory and add them. So I'm going to add them for the secure source code. Just leave that one. I added the user ADO user. Now if I go ahead and I refresh this, the ADO user has the access to VRK test projects. Now if I select that, here we go. The user is ADO user and he was able to access us. So why are we suggesting this solution? How it is so related to secure source code? Now user can go ahead and access the source code because he has been part of the Azure Active Directory, which is an identity provider in Microsoft Azure. And this is one of the most used Active Directories. Microsoft Active Directories are one of the most preferred identity providers, and Azure AD, Azure Active Directory, is an identity provider provided by from the cloud solution point of view. So all the cloud solutions will get authenticated from Azure AD, Azure Active Directory, and just because you have credential and username and password doesn't mean that it is actually doing the job. It is just helps. There is a lot of authentication involved. A lot of authentication mechanism is involved when you are using Azure Active Directory, and which is a one of the best up to date identity providers and all that. So we even have on-prem Active Directories, and we can integrate Azure Active Directory, and from that on-prem users can go and access the Azure repos. But the whole point is we are only giving our the access to our source code, which is there in our project, only to the organization's users. And how are they being added? They're being added because they're integrated with Azure Active Directory. This is a very simple way to ensure that we are having a very secure access to only to a set of users in our organization. Outside the organization, we are not providing anyone. Hope this is clear. If there are any questions, please post it in the chat section so that I can address. So this is what is Azure Active Directory integration. So what you guys have to do, if you wanted to do the same practice, first things which you have to do is keep it very short. You have to go to portal.azure.com, sign in, create an account for yourself. It'll ask for your credit card and all that, but it is fine. Create an Active Directory. Then go ahead, go for Azure DevOps. Even if you don't have subscription, it is fine. But as you're keeping these examples and all that, try to recommend to have an Azure subscription. But if it is not there, it is fine. You can use Azure Active Directory and all that. So you can go to Azure DevOps using dev.azure.com. Or you can search here in this portal.azure.com, Azure DevOps organizations, and it will lead to you there. Once you're there, create an organization because you're first doing it, it'll ask you to create an organization, and then you create a project. Once you create a project, and you will go ahead again to your portal, go ahead to your portal.azure.com, and you'll go into Azure Active Directory. What will you do? You will go into Azure Active Directory. You'll search for Azure Active Directory, and you will go inside users section in Azure Active Directory. You will see it in the left side in the Azure Active Directory. And once you go into users, you will go and create a user. Go ahead and create a user. And that's nothing but create a new user. Do not call external provider at this point of time. And just create, give a password and everything. And open incognito and try to sign into Azure portal. Okay, portal.azure.com. You won't be seeing anything other than these things. But search for Azure DevOps organization. When you create a user and click on this My Organizations, you should be able to see nothing. It'll ask you to create your organization and all that. But what is your point? Because you created one project with your own credentials and organization and project, you should be you wanted that newly created user to access that one. So how will you do that? You will go into that organization which you created from your first credential, and you go into organization settings, and you first ensure that in Azure Active Directory it is linked. In case if it is not linked, you will it will ask for connect directory, and you'll click on connect directory, and it will automatically connect to that. So you don't have to worry about it. And for this to get updated, it might take some 10 to 20 minutes or sometimes 30 minutes or 1 hour plus. Now, if you're doing it in your organization, it might not work for you. The reason is because you should be a global admin or Azure DevOps administrator to go and do this kind of activities. Please, once again, I'm saying you, if you're doing it from your personal accounts, your Gmail accounts, or from your personal Microsoft accounts, it works. But because you are the admin of the portal, you're admin of this portal.azure.com, so you are by default for this Azure DevOps also, you are the admin. But in case if you are trying to do it from your organization point of view, first things which you have to do is go to Azure Active Directory. Inside the roles and administrators, you should have access to DevOps administrator. If you are not the Azure DevOps administrator, you can't go to Azure Active Directory and link that Active Directory to it, and because you don't have the access to go and add users to this and all that. So it's very important that you are being the Azure DevOps administrator, so that you can have access to do a lot of activities in terms of this. I hope I was clear. Once you're having the access, once you added the Active Directory as such, and you're able to see it like this, that is when you go into users, invite the user. You invite the user, give him the basic level access itself, and add him to that project which you have created, and then click on add, and you should be able to see that user in this list. And once you're able to do it, you refresh this, and that user should be, whatever newly created user yourself should be able to have the access to that organization. With this, you're not just providing access to Azure DevOps, you are ensuring that you're providing access to project repository. If I go ahead and create a sample repository, okay, I'll go ahead here and I'll search, have the user is having access to sample test repository. So this is how we are securing the source code to only allowed users. So if at all anyone outside the user, can he access this repository? No, because he has to be part of it. So being part of Azure Active Directory, you will have lot of you'll have lot of things, security things involved in the organization. That's how they are securing the access. Questions here? What is about Git credentials? What is about Git credentials? So if I go ahead and I clone this and I click on Git credentials, generate credentials, it's going to generate me a set of credentials, a username and password. Now I use your Git this one, log in into my, so it will give me a long username, a unique username and a password to connect to it. Now using Git credentials, I can, even I don't have access, doesn't really matter if I don't have access to the repository or not. But using the credentials, I can go ahead and connect to the repository. That's what they're trying to say. I enable this one. When I'm installing the Git, it is trying to say go and enable Git credential manager. Okay, so when you're installing Git in your Windows, there will be this installation process, right? So there it's asking to go ahead and enable Git credential manager. If you're not doing it, you can go ahead and use commands and all that. But this is more simpler. If you're using Git credential manager, it will open a window saying provide your username and password, and you will provide it. So it will be much easier if you are able to generate the credentials and all that. Uh, so when you're providing this URL, will you use your username and password? I wanted to even show that. So I'm opening the Visual Studio Code here. It's taking such a time to open it up. But let's go ahead, open a text file. And here I have this Git URL. Now I have to provide username, which I got from when I generate the credentials, and I use generate password and I mention this one. I believe this is how it is, but I can go and look for that specific command. If I can go ahead and use this, it will be pretty much helping. I'm unable to see this, but yeah, here it is. So we'll do use HTTPS. The git user, the whatever the username which I got it, mentioned that here. When I clicked on this git generate credentials, it will open, show me username, password, and all that. And I can go ahead and provide that password and I can get it. So let me try that out. I can use this domain and I can do git clone. When I do a git clone with this one, it will automatically authenticate me and it will clone the repository into my machine. Now, what is it, this one? So, why are we doing this? So, whoever is having that username and password, they can authenticate to it. So, even that is one way of authenticating into Azure DevOps, into the secure, into this Azure Repos. But we don't recommend users to generate the credentials manager and all that. Instead, we prefer them to have access to Azure Active Directory and they can clone the repository. It to the specific stakeholders and everywhere. We provide them the Git credentials and all that, username and password, and they can have the access to that repository whenever they're using that credentials and all that. Now, what is PAT tokens? This Azure DevOps, this whatever this repository is nothing but it will have the application code or source code, right, to develop the application or to run the application, host the application, whatever it is. Now we have to this pipeline in pipelines we'll do a perform, we'll check the source code is good or not and all that. So before there is no Azure DevOps tools or DevOps tools as such like Jenkins. There used to be no tools as such before some 8 years back. Right now you are able to see a lot of DevOps tools. That point of time, what they used to do, they used to take this code, application code, and they test it in one machine. They used to test it, they used to build that code in another machine. They used to check what is the code quality and all that. So is it safe to actually ensure that we are taking the source code and keeping it in different machines and all that? So right now DevOps tools, what they're doing is they'll run that entire activities inside the pipelines itself. So even the pipelines, to get the access, we will generate PAT tokens. Using the personal access tokens, uh, they will be able to how do I say it? These agents will have access to access the repository, and those machines are only created for the purpose of running the pipelines and all that. So that's where we use PAT token. So if I just show you how a PAT token looks like, if I click on new, I'll just create a sample one. So I can give a PAT token access, and I can say custom defined, and it's a full access. Now, if you see custom access, it is having access to code, read, write, manage, full status, and all that. These are all the options which are there in custom if you wanted them to access the code, this PAT. So whoever is having this PAT token, they will have access to this code and all that. If you wanted to give full access, they'll have access to the entire Azure DevOps organization as such. So it's a pretty important one. So here I'll just name it as a sample PAT token. How good does it look like? It just looks like a credential. Now, where do we provide it? To some specific machines, we go ahead and provide this PAT token when they wanted to authenticate to Azure DevOps. Okay. So once they have access to the Azure DevOps organization, they will be having access to the repository and all that. So this way also, we are providing machines a very safe way of providing access instead of we are trying to take that code. And so whenever it needs that access, it will use that PAT token to contact Azure DevOps and get the source code and run it, whatever it has to do. So here you are always talking about access. What if you're trying to give credentials there? You have to ensure that the credentials are being removed and all that. Instead of it, we use the PAT tokens in a safer manner, and the PAT token by default will be expired. So if you remember, while I was creating a PAT token, I selected the date as today's end date. So it will expire by today itself. So that's how I was trying to use this PAT token. So we can ensure that you can use PAT tokens for machines, whichever needs to perform code scanning or security check scanning or generate a build or take testing on the code and all that. They use this PAT tokens to directly communicate with Azure DevOps and pull that projects in secure manner than sharing the credentials and all that. So in previous era, when there is no, what I mean to say previous era, so this is a technological shift in terms of DevOps and cloud and all that. So previously, before that, what organizations used to do, they used to have users, they used to log in into one machine and they used to clone that repo and they used to test it in that machine and all that. Right now, all this are being done with Azure DevOps or the DevOps tools as such, not just Azure DevOps. There's Jenkins, Bamboo CI, GitHub. So there are different tools, GitHub tools. So they are, sorry, DevOps tools. So they are using pipelines to run the entire steps and everything. So this is why code, actually making the code more secure, became a very prime thing. And in Azure Repos, you can use this methodologies. So my point is, when you're talking about that you have done so and so project and you have implemented security controls, you can talk about, so there are three ways to access the repository you in Azure Repos. Whenever there's a code in the Azure Repos, I can be part of an Active Directory, and I can go ahead and be added as a user into the Azure DevOps organization wherever the code repository is there, so that I can get the access to the repository. Or the other way is, I can go to Azure Repos and request for generate grid credentials, and using these grid credentials, I will be able to clone that repository into my local machine. Other way is, I can there is also PAT tokens. So using PAT tokens, I can connect the some specific machines to this repository to get the access and perform some pipeline activities. That's what you can say. This is it so far. I think this is pretty much important to know. So I leave out a few things to your plate. Uh, we don't use PAT tokens for users to be giving access and all that. We prefer PAT tokens to be given for machines. We don't prefer to give PAT tokens. We don't do that way. The PAT tokens are not meant for giving users. It is for machines to directly go and access uh, to perform pipeline activities. I have to show an example for Azure DevOps to go and do it. How would I do that? So I'll create a file, sample.txt. Say sample text is created in Azure Post, and I'll create a commit. Okay. So let me show you. I'm creating a machine here. I believe I'm inside the same subscription. RG M01. I click on trust, spot machines, password, container. I'm creating a virtual machine. I wanted to show an example how a PAT token will be utilized. This might be, if you guys are new to Azure and all this might be new. I wanted to show you how the PAT token access would look like and all that. Why it is, in terms of a security point of view, it is important. So I go ahead, I disable this, I click on review, press create. A machine is getting created. It might take a minute or so. I'll pause. Machine got created. I'll go inside the machine. Got the public IP. Let me connect to the machine. I'm inside the machine. A few things which I have to make sure that when I give access to the machines, I have to do few things. I have to ensure that I'm setting up as an agent because, as I said, the machines are there to run some specific pipeline activities. When I wanted that to happen, I have to go and add that machine there. So this is a Linux machine. So you need to know all these things. The only thing is you need to know how does it that work. Uh, So I copy this commands. This is also called as setting up DevOps agents. So if you wanted to know how do I create a DevOps agents and all that, you can refer my video YouTube channel and all that. But here I can say R and PSTS. I'm trying to uncompress that this folder and I have this files. Now first things which I have to do is I have to run config.sh. So that's what is going on. So I run this one. So here I'm trying to connect this machine, whichever I just created, to this Azure DevOps. I wanted to do it. It's asking me to which project you wanted me to connect it to. This one, test VRK projects organization, I wanted it to connect. So that's the URL. That's why it should be unique across Azure DevOps. And now, do you wanted the authentication type to be PAT token? Yes. So I click on enter. That's what is yes, and I have to provide the PAT token. Now to provide the PAT token, it's very simple. I go here, I click on token, I select this, and the custom is custom defined. And still tomorrow, I wanted to give full access, and I'll name it as sample. Click on this, I copy the secret, I provide that secret personal access token, just control, I just pasted it there. If you see, it is trying to connect this URL saying that, bro, I have the access with this credit so and so password. Just give me access to your organization. It has given the access. So there you wanted it to be a default agent pool and select this. Let's not complicate there. I just don't want to explain that too much because that's we are getting into Azure DevOps, all such activities. Now, if I go into a default, there was previously no agents. Now, if you see there's VM01, which is nothing but the machine which we have created. So I connected my machine to this Azure DevOps. That's where I used PAT token to do that. That's how the access has been. How it is so related to secure source code and to the security of this source code and all that. I'll get to that. So it just becomes offline to online. It became online. So it is ready to run the pipeline jobs and all that. So I'll create a sample pipeline here. And what code repository I wanted to access it. I wanted it to access the sample test repository. So when I'm creating a pipeline, so please let's not complicate too much. When I wanted to, I just create a pipeline to perform some activities. So let's assume that this pipeline is having this source code is an application source code. I wanted to build that source code or test that source code and all that. So that point of view, I'll say ls, I'll say cd mm, it is taking this code, right? It is going and having the access to the source code. So here, mm, say copy files. variables, predefined variables. What I wanted to show is copy files, publish artifacts. Okay, predefined variables. About the one, so let me try it out. I'll just say this. So here ls and say ls echo. Wanted to read what is there in the sample.txt. That's why I created this. So it is going to take the entire source code and it has to go and check it. So before that, let me test it out, whether it is working or not. String arguments are valid. Okay, I'll just queue this. This agent, if at all we see it, what it will do is it will download the sample.txt. It will download because in this pipeline, when I created this pipeline, I asked to own the repository. Like this pipeline will do perform some task like build the source code or copy the source code to some place and all that. We'll try to do a lot of activities. So how this task, where are they running? They are running inside an agent called default agent pool, and the default agent pool, if you guys remember, while I was setting up the agent pool, I added that. So if you see job one, which is running, which has ran, it's nothing but job one. It's ran inside this machine agent, and so if you see job one task is being completed. So its entire steps have ran inside this computer. Now when it is running, it is went and did a clone repository. If you see, it had tried adding that repository into this machine. So this entire things have run inside the machine. How it is running should not know at this point of time. This way beyond the course or this project is. It is more about how are we able to machines are going and accessing this project and all that. So they went and I have the access to it. Yeah. So they are inside the same thing. So if I type here uh at sample.txt and I'll save it and I'll click on save and queue. So it will go and run that specific agent. This is job 2. So this is going to run inside this machine. And when it is running inside the machine, it is going and cloning that repository and it is going to run that things. So if I go ahead, this is checkout sample is nothing but it is copying from the main branch whatever files are there and whatever you ask to do, it will go and do it. Now if I read it, uh, add that sample.txt, I believe didn't generate anything. Okay. If I create here other file, saying sample text2 or text, and I'll say created this. Now I try to save this. I try to queue this. It's running a second job. So again, that is running inside this only. It's running in the this this one. So I'll go ahead. We need to wait for a couple of seconds this job to get completed. Here it is got completed. Now if I see, I have sample text2.text. Now, so whatever has been, so how it is able to get the access? Because used PAT token in the machine to go and get the access to this repository. Otherwise, how would this machine can go and access this repository? Just because you created in Azure portal doesn't mean that they will automatically have the access to that Azure DevOps and all that. That's not how it works. So I'm just completing, going and closing this. So this is how using a PAT token, we are giving access to the source code. Now, previously how I was saying, so they're using credentials to do that. So that's more inefficient way of doing it. So always remember that if you are going ahead and creating anything, go ahead and delete this. So this is how the authentications, this 3 authentication mechanisms work in terms of securing your source code, which is there in the Azure DevOps, which is nothing but in Azure Repos. Okay, that's it, guys. I'm stopping the recording.